All right, let's dive into what is, without a doubt, one of the biggest stories ever told. We're talking about the story of evolution. It's this grand investigation, really, a mystery that stretches back billions of years. And we're about to follow the clues.
So, what's the big question here? It's one that people have been asking forever. Where did all this incredible diversity of life come from? I mean, think about it. From the teeniest microbe to the most massive whale. How did we get all of this? It seems impossibly complex, right? Well, it turns out science has a pretty powerful explanation.
For the longest time, the going theory was something called spontaneous generation. The idea was that life could just, poof, appear out of nowhere, like from mud or old straw. Seriously. But then this brilliant guy, Louis Pasteur, came along and completely changed the game. He proved once and for all that life only comes from, other life. And that one discovery, it was absolutely crucial. It cleared the way for a totally new, revolutionary idea.
And that, of course, brings us to the lead detective in our big mystery, Charles Darwin. This is the guy who enters the scene and is about to drop an idea so profound, so radical, that it would change our understanding of biology forever.
So Darwin's out on his famous voyage aboard the HMS Beagle. And he wasn't just, collecting souvenirs. He was collecting clues. He started noticing some really interesting things, like how living animals in an area looked a lot like the fossils found right there, or how different species, even ones that seemed totally separate, shared this uncanny number of features. He started to see a connection, a kind of thread of history that linked all life together.
So the big question is, how does life actually change over these vast stretches of time? Well, Darwin came up with a mechanism, an explanation, that he called natural selection. Now, it's super important to get this. It's not a totally random process. Think of it more like a powerful filter. Let's break down exactly how it works. Okay, this breaks it down into 4 simple steps. First off, you've got variation. Just look around, no 2 individuals in any group are exactly the same, right? Step 2, some of those little differences give certain individuals a survival advantage. Maybe they're a bit faster or better at hiding, which leads to step 3, reproduction. The ones with the advantage tend to survive longer and have more babies, passing on those winning traits. And finally, the big payoff. Over generations, those useful traits become more and more common in the whole population. It's a simple idea, but man, is it powerful. Okay, so Darwin's got this incredible idea. But what's the evidence? Where's the proof? Well, it turns out the clues are all around us. They're in the rocks beneath our feet, they're in our own bodies, heck, they're even in our DNA. So let's open up the case file and see what we've got.
First up, we have clue number 1, the fossil record. This is a big one. These are literally the preserved remains of ancient life. And by looking at different layers of rock, scientists can see a clear story. Life on Earth wasn't always like it is today. You find simpler life forms in the older, deeper rocks, and more complex ones in the newer layers. It's like a physical timeline of evolution written in stone.
All right, clue number 2 is something called comparative anatomy. And this is a fantastic example. Just take a look at the forelimb of a human, a bat, and a whale. On the surface, they're used for totally different things, right? Grasping, flying, swimming. But when you look at the bones inside, it's the same basic blueprint. The same set of bones, just modified for a different job. That's a homologous structure, and it's a massive clue that they all evolved from a common ancestor that had that original pattern.
And now for clue number 3. This is the stuff from the modern era, the ultimate smoking gun, really, biochemistry. When we dive into the very code of life, the DNA and proteins, we find the most incredible similarities between different species. Sure, your genes are really similar to a chimpanzee's, that makes sense. But get this, you also share genes with a banana. A banana. It's wild. What it tells us is that the basic operating system for all life is fundamentally the same, which is just powerful evidence of a shared ancestry.
Now, you might be thinking this is all ancient history, stuff that happened millions of years ago. But here's the thing. Evolution isn't just a story about the past. It's happening right now, all around us. We can literally see it in action. So let's look at a couple of real-time examples.
Okay, this is such a classic example, the peppered moth in England. Picture this. Before the Industrial Revolution, most of these moths were a light speckled color. Why? Because they blended in perfectly with the lichen on the trees. But then, the factories started pumping out soot and the trees got dark and dirty. All of a sudden, the light moths stuck out like a sore thumb for birds to eat. But the dark-colored moths, they were perfectly camouflaged. And guess what? Their population just soared. That right there is a perfect snapshot of natural selection happening in real time.
So, what happens when one species gets to a new place, and there are all these open jobs, these new ways to make a living with no competition? Well, sometimes you get this incredible burst of evolution called adaptive radiation. It's when one single ancestral species just explodes into a whole bunch of new species to fill all those empty slots.
And this is exactly what Darwin saw in the Galapagos with his famous finches. It was a light bulb moment for him. He found all these different kinds of finches, but he noticed their beaks were all highly specialized. Some had big, tough beaks for crushing hard seeds. Others had thin, pointy beaks for picking out insects. He realized they couldn't have all arrived like that. Instead, he figured out that they must have all evolved from one single type of finch that made it to the islands long ago and then diversified.
So all these clues, all this history, it's all been leading up to the story of one very particular species, us, Homo sapiens. So where do we fit into this epic tale of life on Earth?
When you look at the grand timeline of life, it's pretty humbling. It's actually mind-boggling. For billions of years, life was just tiny single cells. The dinosaurs, they came, they ruled for ages, and they vanished. It's only in the last few million years that our first upright walking ancestors even showed up. And us, modern humans, we are, in the grand scheme of things, incredibly recent arrivals on the scene.
So, if we want to trace our own specific story, the trail really starts to get warm around 15 million years ago, with primates like Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus. The fossils show us that one was more ape-like, while the other started showing more human-like features. The stage was being set for what would eventually become us.
Okay, now let's jump forward to about 2 million years ago. This is where we meet Homo habilis, often called handyman. And the key thing to notice here is the brain capacity. We're looking at around 650 to 800 cubic centimeters. That bigger brain is almost certainly what allowed for the big innovation of the time, making and using the first stone tools.
Then, next up on the scene about 1.5 million years ago is Homo erectus. And look at that, another big jump in brain capacity. Now we're up to 900 cubic centimeters. This was a really successful ancestor. Taller, stronger, and super important, this was the first of our relatives to venture out of Africa and spread across the globe. And the trend just keeps on going. By the time we get to the Neanderthals, who are around from about 100,000 to 40,000 years ago, that brain capacity had swelled to an impressive 1,400 cubic centimeters. I mean, that's right in the same ballpark as modern humans. And with all that brain power, they became really sophisticated survivors, using hides to protect themselves and thriving in the harsh climates of the Ice Age. And that brings us to us, Homo sapiens. Our species first arose in Africa, and then, like Homo erectus before us, spread across all the continents. And then, something incredible happened. Around 10,000 years ago, we figured out agriculture. That changed everything. It laid the foundation for civilization, and from that moment on, the pace of human history has been absolutely breathtaking. You know, this quote really puts it all into perspective. The world we see, inanimate and animate, is only the success stories of evolution. Just think about that. Every single living thing around you, every plant, every animal, every person, is the result of an unbroken chain of survival stretching back billions of years. They are all, in their own way, the success stories. And so that leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. We know that evolution is a stochastic process. It's based on chance events, on random mutations, and shifts in the environment. It's an ongoing story, and our chapter definitely isn't finished yet. So what does the next chapter in the human story look like? Where are we headed? That, perhaps, is the next great mystery for us to solve.